Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for being here. I am Dr. Sheheryar Khan, and I have been teaching in HED Punjab for more than 18 years now, and also in many other institutions. Today, the topic of our discussion is tragedy. In our ordinary daily life use, we talk about tragedy as something disastrous or crisis, something which is unpleasant or sad, like उसके साथ बड़ी tragedy हो गई है, yeah, that was very tragic. But actually, this word, it has a very long history. It is an art form that started in ancient Greece, probably 26 or 2700 years ago. And as an art form, it transformed and evolved through the ages. And even though we think that it has a monolithic or single definition, it is very hard to define tragedy, what tragedy is. Today, we will discuss it from the perspective of certain philosophical concepts and cultural concepts and some other literary concepts as well that shaped tragedy through the ages. Let's first discuss a little bit of its history. Even though we are not certain about it, but it is said that tragedy, it started from chorus. Now, what was chorus? In ancient Greek civilization, there was a festival that was held in spring, which was called City Dionysia, and that festival was held in the honor of their god Dionysus. I mean, Greeks, they believed in many gods. They polytheistic religion it was. They believed in. And Dionysus was their god of wine, plantation, and passion. Every spring, because he was god of plantation, so every spring when the new plants and flowers they would grow, they would hold a festival in the honor of that god, and in that festival they would perform a spectacle, a drama-like story that was performed on the stage. And initially, it was in form of just a song. And a group of singers, which was called chorus, they would come to the stage and they would sing and dance. And through that song, they would tell a story. Usually those stories, they were derived from myths, their mythological religion, which were basically the stories of their creation they believed in. The band of singers, they would go dancing on the right side and then on the left side, and during that dance they would sing a song, and that song would be the story, and there would be audience sitting. Later on, perhaps by Euripides, who was one of the three greatest Greek tragedians that we know about, he introduced dialogues in the tragedy. The chorus, usually it was arranged by or paid by the city, which was called polis. I mean, they have city-states in Greece, which were called polis. We have this word metropolitan derived from that. And they, polis, it would be responsible for the payment of or the arrangement of all that festival, and it would pay the actors. And but there was also, I mean, they would appoint a wealthy citizen who would also contribute in that, and whoever would be the contributor of a particular tragedy, that person would act as the leader of the chorus, who was called choregos. And for first time, choregos was the one who would speak. I mean, all the other members of the chorus, they would just sing, but he was the, initially, when dialogues were introduced, choregos was the one who would speak. Later on, Aeschylus and Euripides, they also introduced actors, and they reduced the song duration and increased the number of dialogues. And they, mean the choregos, he would be involved in dialogues with the actors, and then up till the time of Sophocles, we see that they, mean there was the choral songs, they were few in number, and dialogues were more. In this way, Greek tragedy, it was a combination of choral songs or odes, which were they called, and dialogues. Because Greeks, they thought of tragedy as something which was meant to, you can say, a kind of tribute or honor to their god Dionysus. So it was, for them, it was a religious kind of activity. Means the way we think of theater or drama or tragedy now, we think of it as an art form or as an entertainment. But for them, it was a religious ritual, and they would take part in it just like somebody would go and worship their gods. So it has a very, you can say, a completely different kind of significance for them. Now, Greeks, they, when, they started to, when they, in those competitions in the city of Dionysia, they turned these tragedies into competitions. There would be a competition, and different tragedians, they would come who had written a tragedy. They would, the actors would perform that tragedy, and at the end, the winner would be rewarded. There are some, you can say, references in which it is said that initially they would pay the winner a goat, and therefore tragedy, it actually in Greek means goat song. There is another reference which says that no, it was not that a goat was paid to the winner, but the actors would perform wearing goat skins, and therefore it was called a goat song. But we are not sure that whether it was true or not. So I was saying that it was a sort of competition, and these three tragedians, that we know about, who are very famous, Euripides and Aeschylus and Sophocles, these three, it is believed that they, amongst them, they wrote 300 plays, but only 32 of them have survived. We have the texts of only 32 of them. Greeks, as we have seen that they have a religious, tragedy for them had a religious significance. Greek tragedy has three very important levels, and it must be understood keeping in view these three levels. For example, living in the contemporary times, when we look back at Greek tragedy, we tend to interpret it from the modern perspective, the way we understand things now. But actually, they mean the meaning of Greek tragedy. It is completely different from the perspectives we have now. Greeks, they had, in Greek tragedy, we see these three levels. One is the metaphysical level, the other is social level, and the third is individual level. Metaphysical level is their gods and myths. Social level is how, as a member of society, what are your duties, or how you should behave living in the social formation, and the individual. Now, for Greeks, all these three levels, they are interconnected. They can't be separated. And this concept that we have now, that, for example, in modern times, when we see tragedies like those of Miller or Ibsen or G.B. Shaw, and we see that how an individual, the hero, is pitted against social forces. In fact, there is a central theme of the modern tragedy is individual versus society. This concept was totally absent in the Greek times. They would never understand individual as pitted against or in opposition to the social forces or the religious concepts of that time. In Oedipus Rex, when Oedipus comes to know of his guilt, that he is the one who killed his father and married his mother, he blinds himself as a kind of self-inflicted punishment. And also he asks Creon to send him away from the city. He accepts the punishment. Now just imagine that Oedipus is living in the modern times, and he commits those crimes, those sins, even unknowingly, or you can say, if he has committed them unknowingly, would he accept his fate? Would he accept that he should be punished? No. He would never accept that. But in case of Oedipus, we see that not only he accepts his punishment, in fact, he, you can say, asks Creon that he should be expelled from the city. And this is the reason that gods later on, they grant him a special status. And it is said about him that now wherever he would go, in whichever city he is buried, that city would be considered holy. This is the reason, that because he accepts that, even though, it can be argued that when he killed his father, he did not know about his identity, or when he married his mother, he did not know that she was his mother. It can be argued. And if he had been an individual living in the modern times, he would have argued his case or pleaded his case this way. But Oedipus does not do that. So in this way, we should not understand Greek tragedy as something in which an individual is against the forces of, against the social forces or against gods. For them, all these three levels, the metaphysical, the social, and the individual, they are one. And they work together. In a Greek drama, chorus represents the society or the social point of view. It is a kind of social commentator. It tells us that what a hero or an individual, how should he or she behave. Another very important concept that is relevant to Greek concept of tragedy and which was raised by Hegel, the German philosopher. In his book Aesthetics, he says that, he commented upon Greek tragedy. Mostly, he focused on Antigone, the other part of Greek, the Oedipus trilogy. In that book, Hegel says that in Greek drama, the conflict is not between good and bad. Now, this is a very interesting observation. In the revealed religions, like Judaism or Islam or Christianity, we have this concept of Satan or devil. And usually, when we interpret society, we also see or interpret many things as a kind of conflict between good and evil. In Greek tragedy, there are no villains and there is no evil. In Greek religion, there is no such concept as devil or Satan, and also they do not believe in this conflict of good and evil. Now, conflict is the very soul of drama. Without conflict, there can't be any drama. Then, what is the conflict in Greek tragedy? The question is, what is the conflict in Greek tragedy? Hegel says that in most of the Greek tragedies, not all of them, in most of the Greek tragedies, the conflict is between two goods. That is, why the hero is punished, or why does he go through the fall? The reason is, it's not that he has done something bad or he is villainous, but it is that their gods, they have different rules, and different gods have different rules and laws. The hero follows the laws or the rules of one god, and in the process, he defies the laws of some other god or goddess. Let us prove it through an example. In Antigone, Antigone says that my brother should be buried because it is the commandment of gods that no dead body should be left in the open. And therefore, she tries to give her brother a symbolic burial by throwing dirt upon his body. Creon, who is the king at that moment, he has declared, I think it was Eteocles, who was the brother of Antigone, that he is the traitor. He has fought against the city-state, against Thebes, and therefore he can't be given a decent burial, and it is also the rule of gods. Creon is following a different rule, Antigone is following a different rule. Both are right. And it is the clash of these two goods because of which Antigone's tragedy, it happens. Same is the case, for example, in Oresteia, the tragedy by Aeschylus. In Oresteia, Orestes, he kills his mother Clytemnestra. Why? Because he believes that Clytemnestra is responsible for the murder of his father, Agamemnon. Now, Apollo, the god of sun and reason in Greek mythology, he has this law that whosoever murders, if somebody's father is murdered, then it is the responsibility of the son to take revenge. And therefore, Orestes kills her mother. But in Greek mythology, there are these avenging spirits which are called Furies. They have a law that if somebody kills his or her own mother, they would take revenge of that murder. Now they are avenging spirits and they start to follow Orestes, and he takes, means he goes to the temple of Apollo, and there he takes refuge there and asks God that he should be helped because he followed his law, the Apollo's law. And later on, I mean, in the third part of the play, they hold a kind of, you can say, assembly, and where gods and men sit and they decide that Orestes should not be punished because he followed a law. And Furies, they were pacified by, because Apollo promised them that they would be transformed into kindly spirits and their status of avenging spirits would be changed. So these are the examples in which, mean, the conflict in Greek tragedy, it is not the conflict between good and bad, but between two goods. What is the, you can say, fault of the hero is moral, mean Hegel calls it moral one-sidedness of the hero. That is, he follows one moral principle, ignoring the other one. This is the fault of the hero. Now, another very important concept related with tragedy is the concept of tragic hero. Now, this has been, there has been a long debate when Aristotle wrote his Poetics in response to his teacher Plato's book. He mentioned that a tragic hero, first he should be from the elite class, he should be a king or a general or a warrior, a person of grand status in the society. And secondly, he said that women and slaves can't be tragic heroes. We will come to that later. And then he also says that why is it that the tragic hero, he suffers or he experiences this fall because he commits hamartia. Now, hamartia is a very elusive kind of term because Aristotle did not explain it, what it is. Poetics is actually not an organized or you can say well-written book. It was actually notes taken by the students, and later on it was compiled or you can say organized in form of a book. And in that book we do not, there are many terms which are unexplained because Aristotle did not explain them, and the notes of the students, and mean we all know that what kind of notes students take, so this is not something that is quite so hamartia is a very controversial term. Some critics are of the view that it is the moral failing, but Aristotle has already said that hero of a tragedy, he does not have any kind of moral flaw in him. Means he is generally a good person, not a totally good person, but a person who is in between, between the neither too good nor too bad. So Then there was this another interpretation by critics that it is hamartia is actually error of judgment. That is, in a particular situation, the hero, he is unable to make a proper judgment, and this is the reason that he suffers and experiences a fall. In this, Hegel also has a quite different stance. He says that actually hamartia is not something which is a failing or a flaw in the personality of the hero. He says that it is one of the best qualities of the hero. One of the best qualities of the hero, because, and that quality in ordinary situation, it serves him really very well. Let us take the example of Hamlet. Hamlet is a very reflective sort of person who thinks too much, and he does not act in a rash way. This is a very good quality in an ordinary situation. He was supposed to be the next king of the country, and this would have served him really very well. That is, not deciding in a very rash manner, thinking before taking a decision. But in that particular situation, when he had to take revenge of his father's murder, that proves to be his flaw. The best quality turns into a flaw for the tragic hero. In case of Othello, we see that he is very quick-minded. He decides quickly, means completely opposite of Hamlet. But because he is a warrior, he is a general in the army, and in war you have to take quick decisions, and this really has served him well. He became the general in a white army just because of that. But when it comes to his, you can say, relationship with his wife, in that particular instance, he needed a calm attitude. He needed to think. And in this way, in case of his, you can say, marital life, his quickness of mind, it turns against him. In case of Oedipus, we also see that he claims to be a person who believes in solving all the riddles. He cannot sit without solving all the riddles, and we see that how this quality of him, it served him well. It served Thebes as well when he was able to answer the riddle of the Sphinx and get rid of that monster. And later on, he is also quite, you can say, when he orders this inquiry, inquiry into the murder of the previous king, he is very, you can say, certain about it, and very deterministic about it, that let this murderer be found. But this very quality of him, this, you can say, desire to pursue truth, it ends up, you can say, it ends in his downfall. He is, at the end of the tragedy, we find that he loses everything. So in this way, Hegel's interpretation that hamartia is not something which is a flaw in the character of the hero. It is something which is a very good quality of the hero. In the ordinary situation, it is very good, but in that particular tragic situation, it turns out to be a kind of flaw, and that causes his downfall. Now, after discussing the conflict and the character, let us discuss another aspect of the character. We see that Aristotle, he emphasized this fact that the hero should be good. I mean, not totally good, but in between, not, neither too good nor too bad. But why is it that later on, especially in the Elizabethan theatre, we see that there are villainous heroes? Aristotle believed that if you show the fall of a villainous person upon the stage, it would not induce the feelings of pity and fear. When people would see that he is a villainous person and he is falling from his position, they would feel happy about it. And the feelings of pity and fear, which are the tragic emotions, they would not be induced amongst the audience. But we see that Elizabethans, they violated these rules. I mean, in the tragedies of Shakespeare and Marlowe, we find villainous kind of characters like Dr. Faustus, Macbeth, and still they were able to create that, they were still able to induce those feelings of pity and fear. Why is that? The answer to this might be that it is not the morality of the hero that the audience is concerned with. It is his status and presentation, or the way he is presented by the dramatist upon the stage. If he is presented as grand and as someone lofty, as someone who has grand ambitions, even though they might be evil, if he falls, then the audience would feel pity and fear for him. For example, even in case of Satan's portrayal in Paradise Lost, we see that in the first two books of Paradise Lost, Satan is presented in such a grand manner by Milton. And this is the reason that the readers, they feel a kind of sympathy with him. They feel pity for him. Same is true in case of Dr. Faustus, same is true in case of Macbeth, and up to some extent, it is also true in case of Mr. Kurtz in Heart of Darkness, even though it is a novel. But the way he is presented in the, even before he appears in the novel for a very brief period of time, but before the build-up was such that when we come to meet him, the readers, when they find him in the deep jungles of Congo, and then when they hear him speak, and then his death, all this is presented in such a way that the readers, even though he is a villainous character, but the readers do feel pity for that person, for that hero. So in this way, this question, which was Aristotle's concern, that if we would not present, if we would present villainous or bad people as heroes, it would not induce the feelings of pity and fear. That does not hold right, and the Elizabethans, they proved this, that even villainous kind of characters, they can be tragic heroes and they can have the same effect. Another question that is related with tragedy, and it really, you can say, puzzles the mind, is that after the Greek period, we see that in European history, tragedy, it sees a decline. The Romans, after the Greeks, the Roman Empire became the dominant civilization in Europe. We see that their tragedies, whatever tragedies they written, they did not have the same kind of impact One reason might be that the Romans, they were not concerned with the tragic questions like who we are or what is our status in this world and why we are born, which were the major concerns of Greek tragedy. Their culture, it was more rooted in spectacles. They were, as you have studied that in Roman culture, there were so many gladiator spectacles which were performed in front of the audience. And therefore, when we study their dramas like that of Seneca, we see that they are, rather than dramas and you can say based on plot works, they are more spectacles. They are spectacles of blood and spectacles of melodrama and all that. So, and then in the 5th century, after the fall of the Roman Empire, we enter into the Middle Ages. In the Middle Ages, there were no tragedy at all. Some of the critics are of the view that in this period, the period starting from 5th century and lasting till the Renaissance, in this period, the European culture, it was dominated by Christianity, and the very beliefs of Christian religion, they were against the spirit of tragedy. That is, in Christian beliefs, they are based upon this concept that a good Christian is that Christian who tolerates, who does not express anger or rage, and who is, you can say, more a saintly kind of person. Now, this particular belief system, which we find in the medieval ages, it was against the spirit of tragedy, because tragedy is, you can say, it is grounded on this fact that the hero would react in some way. For example, it is the rash and angry nature of Oedipus that makes him do certain kind of things, and that lead to his fall. Same is the case with Othello, for example, or Macbeth. If all these heroes, if they continue to forbear or tolerate whatever was done wrong to them, and how the action of tragedy would move forward. So, this is the reason that we do not find any notable tragedy written in those thousands years which we call the medieval ages. There were certain poems which can be called tragic, but there was no, of course there were later on, the church started to enact these performances which they called miracle and mystery plays and morality plays, but their purpose was didactic. They wanted to teach Christian beliefs to their audience, to the simple villagers, and the tragic emotions or those, they were not their concern. And then we see that in Renaissance, in Elizabethan times, suddenly tragedy starts to flourish. After almost a hiatus of 2000 years, suddenly there is a rise in tragic literature. We find that Shakespeare and Marlowe, they start to write, and the university waits, they start to write such grand kind of plays, and they are equal to the status of the ancient Greek tragedy. And after that, we again experience a fall. Why is that? This has perplexed the critics as well, that what was something which was in Greek period or in Elizabethan times that made those tragedies possible. One explanation for this may be that tragedy flourishes in those cultures which have divergent and multiple point of views. In those cultures which consider themselves as absolutist cultures, where they think that one particular belief is the absolute one and there is no room for any other or alternate point of view. In those cultures, tragedy does not flourish. In Greek times, even though it was a religious society, but it was not an absolutist religious society. As I discussed earlier, that each god has his own rules and regulations. There was a conflict of opinion. Mean one god has to say something something about a particular aspect of human life, and another god has to say something quite different about the same aspect. There was a conflict of opinion. That conflict of opinion again emerged in the Renaissance, when for the first time society started to get secularized. After humanism, Renaissance, it was also in philosophy, it was the rise of humanism, when man was put at the center of universe for the first time. Before that, religion and God was put at the center. Everything was interpreted in relation to religion and God. Humanist philosophers, for the first time, they put man at the center of everything. And later on, Descartes, he put human consciousness and reason at the center of everything. In this way, we see that this was a period, Elizabethan times was a period, when suddenly conflict emerged. The conflict between religious societies and the secular society. The conflict between belief and disbelief. And in many works of, for example, if you look at Dr. Faustus is, even though at the denouement of the play, the climax of the play, it confirms religious morality of Christianity, but actually it is a highly, you can say, it is a play that questions the very foundation of Christianity, and you can say Dr. Faustus, he decides to side with the devil. And same is the case with Macbeth, that Macbeth, he violates the traditions of hospitality and loyalty to the king, and loyalty to the age-old concepts of religious morality, that one should not murder, and he violates all those rules, and he creates a kind of conflict. We see this conflict in all these plays. So one interpretation can be that in these two periods that became one of the in which tragedy flourished, are those periods in which there was conflict. So another very important aspect that I would like to discuss is that how modern tragedy is different from Elizabethan or the Greek tragedy. Modern tragedy, it started in the 19th century, after Industrial Revolution. In Europe, Industrial Revolution, that was an event which had very far-reaching social and other implications. It gave birth to democracy in Europe. Agricultural system, it had kings and feudals as their rulers, but Industrial Revolution, it brought with it a new system, a new political system that we call democracy. Now, as we have discussed, that Aristotle was of the view that tragedy should always be about grand heroes or kings or princes. It cannot be about common people. For the first time in the post-industrial revolution times in Europe, people started to raise this question that why is it that tragedy can't be about common people? Because now the common people were the, you can say, source of power in the society. They were the ones who would elect the people at high posts and all that. So for the first time, this question was raised, and it also perplexed the critics, because how to show the fall of the common man? If the tragedy was about the fall, and the fall is always from a height. If the common man is he is already downtrodden, how can his fall be depicted upon the stage? And what would it yield? And Hegel also said that if you show such kind of fall or such kind of character upon the stage, which is already a very ordinary and common kind of person, what would be the result? That it would not be the tragic pity that would be you can say, that would be experienced by the audience. It would be mere pity. The pity that we feel for a person who is going through a very miserable kind of situation, that is not a tragic pity according to some critics and philosophers. It is a mere pity. And some of the critics, they say that even though that we sympathize with Arthur Miller's Willy Loman, that he loses his job and at the end he has to commit suicide, or we feel pity for many other such kind of, or John Proctor in The Crucible, but that is not that tragic kind of pity that we felt for King Lear or Hamlet or Oedipus. Now this is also a debate that is going on, that is it really possible for the common man to be the central character of a tragedy? But it does not mean that tragedy can't be written about common man. Many tragedians have written such kind of tragedies, like we have the example of Ibsen, the Norwegian dramatist, who for the first time introduced common people into his plays. And actually he is the first one who introduced women as central characters. And his women characters are more powerful as compared to his male characters. And they are very convincing too. For example, Hedda Gabler or Nora Helmer. They are very convincing characters, and he was able to induce the feelings of the tragic feelings through the help of these characters. He also is the one who introduced the concept of social plays or problem plays, in which at the end he would leave a problem unsolved. Unlike the ancient or the classical tragedies, he would not resolve any action. He would not give the solution at the end. He would leave a problem unsolved. For example, as we see in case of The Enemy of the People, in which the problem is left totally, you can say, unresolved, that whether that doctor, I forgot his name, the doctor is supposed to tell the authorities about contamination in the waters or not. And the same is the case with the wild duck also. So we see that tragedy is possible in keeping in view the common man, if you put him at the center. Yes, those kind of tragedies, the tragedies which we find in the Elizabethan times or in the Oedipus or in Greek period, the modern plays are not like those. And then in the 20th century, we also see that there is a more focus on, on one side, there are playwrights who wrote about man's position and meaninglessness of life, like the Theatre of Absurd, like Beckett or Ionesco or Pirandello. On one side we have these, and then on the other side we have the political theatre of Bertolt Brecht, which is totally different from, these were the two parallel trends that we find in especially after the post-Second World War period in Europe. On one side there are political plays, like political plays of first Brecht, then Carol Churchill, and then even Harold Pinter, Errol Pinter is more, he's not political, he is more in the line of theater of the absurd, but Edward Bond, all these playwrights, they were writing political theater in which their concern was to bring reformation in the society, especially Brecht. Brecht, in order to change or revolutionize society, because he was a Marxist, he introduced a completely new concept of theater which he called epic theater, which is a paradox because epic is meant to be narrated, not performed. But he called his theater epic theater, and he introduced many new kinds of techniques in it, and he rejected the Aristotelian concept of pity and fear as the function of tragedy. He said that tragedy should not be emotional. He said that tragedy should be rational. It should make the audience think that what is happening around them. For example, his Galileo Galilei, his play on the life of the scientist, it introduces contradictions in the character of Galileo. He presents the character of Galileo in this way that neither you can sympathize with him, nor you can neither you can feel pity for him, nor you can associate yourself with him. In one scene, Galileo is talking about changing the very contours of society. He says that this new invention, that is telescope, it would change science, and it would change the traditions. And in the next scene, he goes to the rector of the university and tells him that I am the one who has invented telescope, even though he was not the one who invented telescope, and tells him that, and requests him that the rector should raise his salary because of this invention. Means he has these contradictions in his personality that stop the audience associating, feeling a kind of association with that character. And on one side he talks about grand kind of scientific discoveries and all, and on the other hand he is shown as having a kind of person who eats too much and he loves food too much. Contradictory kind of things are present in the character. Same is the case with Good Women of St. Swan, in another play of Bertolt Brecht, and also in The Mother Courage and Her Children, in which Mother Courage claims to be a mother who loves her children, but at the same time she tries to seek profit from war, the 30-year war that was going on in Europe. And what happens at the end, that because of the war, all her children die. This contradiction in the play, these contradictions, what was the purpose of that? Brecht, in one of his essays, he wrote that my purpose is that the audience, they should never associate themselves with the hero, because when they feel association with the hero, what do they do? That they stop thinking, they become emotional. And the purpose of theater is to make people think and see that what is happening in the society. On one hand, in 20th century, we have writers who believe in such this the political theater, the purpose of which is reformation, and on the other hand, we have absurdist and existentialist theater, in which the main focus of the playwright is to show the meaninglessness of life. So these are two opposite trends which are dominated by tragedy in the contemporary times. So this is mostly from my end, and if you have any questions.
You covered mostly the Western literature, but you didn't, I'm not sure that whether intentionally or unintentionally you avoided the Indian tragedy or even the Middle East tragedies if it is written in the on the same principle, because the Greek philosophy influenced the Middle East as well, although the Indian was least influenced. And what about the Chinese? Was there any tragedy? If you have some information, because this is the whole world. We are not now confined to the single point of view. That's if you can share some. If okay, if share, no problem. Thank you.
I opted for this because, one reason is that this is my subject, my discipline. And another reason is that tragedy is actually a Western genre of literature. Even though we find here and there examples of such kind of plays written in Eastern and other cultures as well, but tragedy as a proper literary genre and also a proper tragic theory, that was totally developed in Europe, and this is the reason that I mostly focused on that.
अस्सलाम वालेकुम सर, मेरा नाम सिकंदर है. थैंक यू वेरी मच फॉर कमिंग. ठीक है, तो सर आपसे सवाल पूछना चाहता हूँ कि अगर कहा जाता है कि ये ऑल दोज ट्रेजेडीज क्रिएट पिटी एंड फेयर इन द माइंड्स ऑफ द रीडर, व्हेन वी रीड दिस स्टोरीज फॉर द सेकंड टाइम, they have no effect on the human mind. So we just feel nothing. What would you like to say that? When the suspense of the story, it means that is revealed and create no effect on the... When I read the story Oedipus Rex for the first time, it created so much fear and horror in my mind. But when I started reading for the second time, I take that story as a just common story. If I say that the people of the modern time, they read the incest story, what kind of effect it will create in the minds of the modern people? It means the function of the literature that is becoming absurd and nothing less. And
देखिए, इसमें जो मेन एक तो रीज़न ये है ना कि ट्रेजेडी इज़ नॉट meant to be read, it is meant to be performed upon the stage. And if you see a good performance of Oedipus again, you will feel pity and fear again. If you happen to see
most of the dramas, we don't have chance to be seen on the theater,
yes.
because they are performed in the Europe. We are not able to go to the Europe and
reading is
watch
not,
all these dramas.
it does not create that kind of impact.
No, sir. I think that if we read intentionally, we want to read these things and we feel that all these tragedies are the great tragedies. But as you see that, sir, most of the students, they are writing nothing. It means that what kind of effect the people of modern age they are having on these people.
As I like that drama, it also has, half of its meaning, they lie in the performance. The way character delivers those lines, the actor, he or she delivers those lines, the way the spectacle is presented upon the stage, and all that scene. Of course, you say that when you read Oedipus for the second time, you do not feel the same way. Because reading, as I told you, that of course, for the first time you came to know about the end of the story, that was all. But if you see the performance of it, and there are some very good actors who are performing that play, I think that you will feel the same impact again. Because tragedy is meant to be performed. We teach it in classrooms, but actually its purpose or objective is not, it is not a narrative form, it is a dramatic form.
Thank you for such a wonderful talk, Dr. Dr. Your title is it is very catchy, the trappings and the suits of woe. Would you please enlighten us?
This is a line taken from Hamlet. When Hamlet is instructing, there is a play within a play in Hamlet, and Hamlet gives directions to those actors who are going to perform that play. And not only those lines, they show the mastery of stagecraft of Shakespeare. but also that he himself must have been a very good actor as well. So this is a line from that conversation that Hamlet has with those actors, that tragedy is actually the trapping and the suits of woe. I mean, he is giving them instructions that if you perform that play in such way, then it will have the same kind of impact.
सर ट्रेजिडी क्या ये रिलेटिव कॉन्सेप्ट नहीं है इन केस ऑफ वार? अगर हम वार के केस में ट्रेजिडी को ले लें, जो वार विन करता है उसके लिए वो ट्रेजिडी नहीं रहता, लेकिन जो लॉस करता है जहाँ पे कैजुअलिटीज़ इंकर हो जाती है फिर हम उसे ट्रेजिडी का नाम देते हैं.
You know, there is a debate even that why is it that common experience is not called tragic? For example, if there is a famine or an earthquake or war, it is not it that it is also tragic. Why do not we call it tragedy? And some of the critics, they are of the view that in order for a tragedy to be called a tragedy, there must be a human agency involved in that. For example, if common people are suffering in war, they do not, you can say, order that war, or they are simply the sufferers of that war. They are not in any way responsible for that war. If they have died in earthquakes, then they have nothing, they are not the cause of that earthquake or famine or whatever. So they are mere sufferers. In tragedy we feel that kind of tragic emotions because the hero is responsible for his actions. Whatever is happening to him, it is his own doing. This makes a tragedy tragic.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sheheryar. It was pleasure listening to you.
Thank you,
very
sir.
wonderfully you summed up the Western tradition of tragedy. I just want to ask one question, because personally I think that the single most seminal document that talks about tragedy is the Poetics.
Yes, no doubt.
When you say that it is not well written, I think it's sort of unfair, because most of the talk that even you gave is actually based on the Poetics. And the best definition of tragedy that we get even today is from the Poetics. And even in the Hollywood today, it's taught as a practical guide for the actors and producers.
Yes.
So, yes, Hegel interpreted it, different people interpret it in a different way. Even Hamartia, I think, is still debated today. But this concept of catharsis, pity and fear and tragic flaw, all these actually originate from the Poetics. So don't you think it's unfair to say that it's not well written?
Well written in this sense, sir, that Aristotle himself did not write it. It is, he was not the original writer of the book. He used to give lectures. His students would note down those lectures, and later on those lectures were combined to form this book. And as you know that when we teachers, when we, for example, talk about some concept or we write it for ourselves, we do not explain it. And therefore there are many terms in poetics which are not explained. Aristotle never explained them. For example, what is the meaning of hamartia? He never mentions it in the book. What is the meaning of catharsis? He never mentions it. And therefore, there are many theories of it throughout the history of tragedy. If you look it up, then you will find that catharsis is interpreted in medical terms, it is interpreted in psychological terms and moral terms, and there are many other. And hamartia is also a controversial and debatable term because it is not explained in the book. If Aristotle had written that book himself, then he might have explained them, that what does he mean by that. This is the reason. I'm not saying that, I'm not downplaying or you can say undermining his effort, but I'm just saying that it is. I mean, there are these controversies or debates because he never explained certain terms which are mentioned in the book.
I have a question here. So far, we have seen like how tragedy has evolved from ancient Greece to in Renaissance and the Elizabethan theatre and all that. Is it so? In this modern era, do you think there'll be another new, a new form of tragedy? If so, then how will it be different from the previous ones?
Tragedy has always been evolving. In every age, even though we try to interpret it as something unified or monolithic, but actually it is not. In every age, the culture of that period, it interpreted tragedy in a completely different way. For example, as I have explained that in Elizabethan times, it was explained or interpreted in a completely different way. The new classicists, they looked at it from a completely different angle. And then in the 19th century, after the societies, they started to become democratic, they introduced a new concept of tragedy in which they said that common person can also be a tragic hero. In the 20th century, theatre, it became highly experimental with more focus on politics and then the meaning of existence and all that. And even in the contemporary times, they are writing tragedies which are in keeping with this changing scenario or human condition. For example, I would recommend that you should watch this movie that is recently released, The Whale. It is based upon a play, and you will see that how in this movie they have presented a completely new version of tragedy that in a completely different way, which is highly contemporary as well. Perhaps this kind of tragedy was not possible in the previous times or previous ages. So please do watch it, and you will see, because that play on which the movie is based, that play was written, I think, in 2012, and it is a contemporary take on what tragedy can be.
So in addition to that, but just to refer to my previous question and the same question that this gentleman asked, the Iranian movie like Children of Heaven or something like that, that is, you remain associated with that, although this is, you cannot say that is whether it is tragedy or comedy, but you remain associated and you feel that pity in the whole movie. So this is one way. The second question, what he said, that what do you think that the climate change, is it the tragedy because you know the person who is responsible for that?
But there is not a single person.
Yeah, but humanity as a whole.
Humanity as a whole, yes.
Yeah, so the same way, in the modern way, you can, any person who is responsible on the individual level, even in the industrial revolution or industrial evolution, you can say, that could be one of the major reasons that contribute to the climate change, and on individual level, everybody is considering that. So coming back to you said one thing which is really I'm very curious about, because you said that in the Middle Ages, like for 1,000 years of the European Dark Ages, what we call it, I'm not sure, because of the Christianity, there was no tragedy written in those era, and that was because they didn't consider. But in all literature, when you see that the crucifixion of the Christ, was it that considered to be a comedy or tragedy at that time? Because that is a big, because when all the story associated with that, at least which is revealed in the Renaissance, it is a tragedy. That was a tragedy sort of thing, a feeling. Although the beliefs are different, but that event, special event, that was, don't you think that is
It happened a long time before Middle Ages, one thing. And if you look it up, you will find that it is not called a tragedy, it is called passion of Christ. That is a completely different meaning and connotation. It is that suffering of Christ for the sins of humanity. And it is, you can say, because it has a metaphysical implication that Christ himself did not do anything. He is not like the tragic hero, he is not responsible for, he is not guilty of anything. And he still takes on the sins of humanity upon his shoulders and sacrifices himself. That is a completely different concept. It has a metaphysical and theological connotation.
Okay, but when the last question, I comment that if we define the comedy exactly, we can get some knowledge, because some understanding of the tragedy, because if there should be opposite definition for the comedy and the tragedy, if you can define just to make the mirror that what is the tragedy is, because it is very, because it is still, I think, I'm confused because of different people they have expressed their views as well, but I'm still confused at what exactly we call the tragedy, because because you have identified very, make it singular for the Hamlet and those special art form, but still we think that if you define the comedy, then we can see that, okay, anything that opposite to the comedy, we can say, some extent, yeah. Just if you want to, because you are the man of literature, we don't want to miss this opportunity.
Comedy, if you look at the literary definition, it is just if a play ends happily, it is called a comedy. A tragedy ends at a very sad note, but comedy ends at a very happy note, where everything is resolved at the end. In modern times, comedy is usually interpreted that kind of drama or story or novel in which there is people are made to laugh. But actually, the ancient definition of comedy was not that. Comedy was any kind of play which would end happily. And it was, the purpose of it was, in some cases, to point out the follies and flaws in the human personality and make people laugh, so that people may see that how this behavior is not a good behavior and they should reform themselves. And there are other traditions as well which are called farce, in which the only purpose was to make people laugh, whatever might be the means used by the writer. जैसे कि आपने वो थिएटर के प्लेस भी देखे होंगे जिसमें लोगों का पर्पस जो है ना वो सिर्फ लोगों को हंसाना होता है, और उसका कोई मैसेज या देयर इज़ नो डीप फिलॉसफी और इन दैट और like that. There is another very interesting observation that in human history, tragic works have always been considered great and not comic works.
Everlasting.
We have, for example, all the great literature or even movies, if you look, most of them are tragedies. It means that human beings, they feel more inclined towards tragedy as compared to comedy.
Okay, now when you talked about modern tragedy, you also mentioned this human agency. I'm surprised why these terms didn't actually turn up when we talk about philosophical and cultural context, and we didn't talk about determinism and free will, even in the Greek tragedy. Don't you think that just like the common man, even those gods and goddesses, even they were powerless, and it's very difficult to say whether we really have human agency, whether there really is or has been free will in any period of history, not just modern times. Maybe our consciousness of it has developed, but even in those days, like in Oedipus Rex, you have these, everything is already written, and it is already like prophets at Delphi. You have to follow the oracles, and it seems that human beings, right from the beginning, they never had this sense of free agent. So what are your thoughts on that?
Sir, I think that the way Oedipus is interpreted as a tragedy of fate, that the fate of Oedipus was already decided even before he was born, actually it is to miss the message of the dramatist. The message was that your fate, it might be written, but you can always avoid it by not trying to avoid it. You can always avoid it by not trying to avoid it. For example, when Lois and Jocasta, they come to know that, the oracle tells them that if they beget a son, he would kill the father and marry the mother. First, they had this choice: do not beget a male child. And if you read the backup story of this myth of Oedipus, in that backup story, it was, it is written that Jocasta, when it was Lois actually who was told this oracle that if you beget a male child, then he would kill the father and marry the mother. Lois, he became really very horrified of this, and he decided that he would never have relationship with his wife now. And he starts to sleep in another room. Jocasta, she was really worried that she thought that he is interested in some other woman. And one day he makes him drink. And when he is too drunk, they had sexual intercourse. And as a result of that, Oedipus was born. The choice was, the gods had already told them there was a conditional sentence: if you get a male child. Now after that, they also had a choice. If they had kept the child, and raised him themselves, they could have avoided this tragedy. Because Oedipus then would have known that who are their parents, who are his parents. But they tried to outsmart the oracle, outsmart gods, and they asked their servant to throw this child away or kill him. Again, when we come to Oedipus, when he goes to the oracle, and the oracle tells him that you will be the one who would marry your mother and kill your father, again Oedipus tries to outsmart the oracle and tries to run away from his parents. If he had gone back to his parents, who were his adopted parents, and remained with them, he would have avoided the tragedy. Or if he had discussed with them. The choice is always there. And then again, he could not have pronounced this curse upon himself as well. But he included himself in that curse. And later on, his wife tells him, do not pursue this matter any further. And still the choice is there at every step. What happens in Oedipus? That Oedipus is unable to avoid his fate because he is trying too much to avoid it. If he had not tried it, this is the tragedy. This is the tragedy, yes. If his parents and he himself had not tried to avoid it, then the tragedy would not have occurred.
Since this session is being live streamed on the Black Hole's Facebook page, we have many audience who are listening us and who are watching us. अल्ताफ़ हुसैन है हमारे साथ, आकिब खान हैं, शफ़क़त अब्बासी हैं, यासर चट्टा हैं और शर्जील अहमद जिन्होंने रिमार्क्स लिखी हैं. Sharjeel Ahmed asks, speaking philosophically, can we call the human birth a comedy and death a tragedy in this theatre of life? चले.
I think both would be tragedies. You know, Slavoj Zizek said that the greatest luck would have been not to have born at all. I mean, he was referring to Oedipus. The greatest luck would have been not to have born at all, but the very few people succeed in that.
G.B. Shaw once, it is ascribed to him, I think. I don't know if it really is by G.B. Shaw or not. He said that there are two tragedies in life. One is not to get your heart's desire, the other is
to get it, yes.
So you can't avoid it either way.
अल्ताफ़ हुसैन पूछ रहे हैं, मैं इसमें थोड़ा इजाफा कर दूँ. देखिए, फ़िलोसॉफ़िकल और कल्चरल कंटेक्स्ट की बात हुई है. फ़िलोसॉफ़िकली तो बहुत से क्वेश्चंस रेज हुए हैं, आज भी डिस्कशन हुई है, डिटर्मिनिज़म, फ्री विल, फेट, चॉइस. अब ज़ात के हवाले से सवाल ये वो. कल्चर जो है वो तो डाइवर्सिफाइड होती हैं, मगर अगर हम ये ट्रेजेडीज़ को देखते हैं, ख़ास तौर पे ग्रीक का आपने ये जो यूनानी अलमिया हैं उनके हवाले से बात की है, वो इतने अरसे से अभी तक चल रहे हैं, आज भी डिस्कस हो रहे हैं, आज भी उन्हें फिल्माया जाता है. तो एक तो मेरे ज़हन में ये सवाल आता है कि क्या इसकी वजह, एक मुमकिन वजह यह है कि उन्होंने बेंचमार्क इतना अच्छा बना दिया कि उसका अभी तक हम के ऊपर एक असर है और हम उससे निकल नहीं सकते. दूसरा ये कि जिसका भी आपने जिक्र किया कि बड़ा आर्ट जो है वो बड़े दुख से जन्म लेता है, और उन्होंने वो दुख जो है वो उतने अच्छे तरीके से पेश किया है कि वो हमें आज भी रेजोनेट करता है. अल्ताफ़ हुसैन का क्वेश्चन है, ये रैंडम थॉट्स आई थी, मैंने ऐड कर दी. अल्ताफ़ हुसैन पूछ रहे हैं, आर देयर मोरल कॉमनैलिटीज़ अमंगस्ट डाइवर्स पीपल, ग्रुप्स एंड कल्चर्स?
There can be moral commonalities, but I don't think the purpose of tragedy is morality. Tragedy does not teach us morality or moral lessons. In the 17th century, there was this attempt to introduce the concept of poetic justice into tragedy, which was later on Schopenhauer also condemned it. That how can tragedy be how can tragedy has poetic justice? If there is poetic justice, then it is not tragedy. If the concept of poetic justice is that the good people should be rewarded and the bad people should be punished. If good people are rewarded and bad people are punished, then how can it be tragic? So I don't think that tragedy has. There can be. It's in its narrative there can be many moral implications, but overall purpose of tragedy is not morality. It does not teach moral lessons.
जो आर्ट है वो हर दौर में कहीं ना कहीं सेंसर होता रहा है, चाहे उसको अखलाकी पैमानों पे तोला जाए, जो भी सोसाइटल वैल्यूज़ हैं, या उसको सियासी हवाले से देखा जाए. आपने कहा और हम भी पढ़ते हैं कि ये जो ट्रेजिडीज़ हैं ये आम आदमी की नहीं है बल्कि रूलर्स की, किंग्स की, बड़े लोगों की हैं, और इसको पब्लिकली पेश किया जा रहा है, यानी परफॉर्मेंस करके. तो कभी बैन या सेंसर नहीं हुई? एक आप बादशाह का जवाल दिखा रहे हैं, उसको एक फ्लॉड ट्रेजिक हीरो के तौर पे दिखा रहे हैं, उसका इतना गमनाक इंजाम है, तो वहाँ पे कभी उन्होंने कोई सेंसर करने की कोशिश की या रोका कि ना दिखाएं हमें ऐसे?
No, I don't think so that tragedy was ever censored in that way. As I mentioned that in Greek times it was a religious ritual for them, and they would not interpret it politically, that it is a political downfall of the tragic hero. It is a downfall, but that downfall is grounded in the humanity of the tragic hero. Oedipus at the end even when he has lost everything, he has lost his eyesight, he has lost his kingship, he has lost his family, now he cannot even live in Thebes. Even then, he is a grand presence upon the stage. Why? Because of his human status. He is no more a king, he is no more a family man, he has lost everything, he cannot even see now, but his human status, that is what is important. I mean, therefore, I don't think that the kings, they would look at it from that angle, from the political angle that we are showing the downfall of a king, but it is the downfall of a human being, actually.
Yeah, but during the Jacobean period, King Lear, because all the people died towards the end of the play, so for almost 100 years, it had a happy ending. It was much later that the real play by whosoever this gentleman Shakespeare was, it was discovered and it was replayed. So I think tragedy was heavily censored during the Jacobean period at least.
But I think, sir, but this was just to appease the audience that they wanted to see a happy ending. Was it censored for the political reasons?
Maybe we'll have a discussion on it later on. But yes, I think so, because King Lear actually had the political connections. It was not just a historical play. It was produced in the royal court.
Yes.
And it was a message for the king. Because of especially this question of legitimacy, who is the legitimate king? It's a very central question, and it has the political reading. So apparently there was maybe religion or maybe the common opinion that we want to see a happy ending. But I think deep down at the bottom there were some political
Political
rivalries as well, I think.
बहुत शुक्रिया सर, थैंक यू.